The transport shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Commander Veltar of the hegemony's most elite strike force was already regretting this mission. Not because of the target, though infiltrating the Crimson Nexus was basically a death sentence wrapped in military protocol. No, he was regretting it because of the human. She sat in the corner of the briefing compartment, arms crossed, staring at nothing with that unsettling stillness that all Deathworlders seemed to possess. While his team of seasoned Kalari warriors discussed tactical approaches and equipment loadouts, the human just existed, like a coiled spring waiting for someone to step on it wrong. "Attention, strike team!" Veltar activated the holographic display, and the briefing chamber fell silent. Well, mostly silent. The human was doing that thing where she breathed too quietly, which somehow made more noise than if she'd been snoring. "Our target is the Crimson Nexus, a fortress prison located in the Shattered Belt asteroid field." The hologram materialized, showing a massive structure carved directly into an asteroid the size of a small moon. Defensive platforms bristled from its surface like metallic thorns, and energy shields shimmered in overlapping layers. "The Nexus has stood unconquered for 3,000 years, Veltar continued. "It houses the galaxy's most dangerous criminals and, more importantly for our mission, Warlord Cracks the Bloody. Intelligence indicates he's planning something that could destabilize the entire sector." One of his lieutenants, Dexon, leaned forward. "Sir, what's our approach vector? Those shield arrays have overlapping fields of fire." "That's the problem." Veltar manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the defensive systems. "Every conventional assault has failed. The shields regenerate faster than any known weapon system can deplete them. The station's automated defenses have a kill rate of 97%. The team exchanged uncomfortable glances. These were soldiers who'd fought through the Crimson Wars and survived the Void campaigns, but a 3% survival rate made even veterans nervous. "What about the service tunnels?" asked another Kalari. "Maintenance access?" "Sealed and monitored. The Nexus was designed by the Architect Guild specifically to be impregnable. They built it assuming attackers would think like civilized beings." That's when the human spoke for the first time since boarding the transport. "Where's the coffee machine?" The entire briefing chamber went dead silent. Veltar stared at her, wondering if translator malfunction could explain what he'd just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The human," her file said Alex Chen, but Veltar was pretty sure that wasn't how you pronounced it, stood up and stretched. "Coffee machine. You know, the thing that makes the brown liquid that keeps people awake? I've been on this transport for 6 hours and I haven't seen one. We're discussing a suicide mission to infiltrate the most secure prison in known space, and you're asking about refreshments." Alex shrugged. "Yeah, well, I figure if we're all going to die horribly, I might as well be properly caffeinated for it. Makes the whole experience more authentic." Dex's Han muttered something in his native tongue that the translator helpfully rendered as "Deathworld savages," which made Alex smile in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Anyway," she continued, "you said every conventional assault failed. Good thing I'm not conventional." Veltar felt that familiar headache building behind his primary eyes. Working with humans was like trying to herd quantum particles. Just when you thought you understood their trajectory, they'd phase shift into something completely unpredictable. "Chen. The mission parameters are quite specific. This is a stealth infiltration requiring precise coordination and—" "Nah." Alex waved a hand dismissively. "I read the briefing. You want Warlord What's-His-Face extracted or eliminated, preferably with proof he's not coming back. Everything else is just details." "Details that keep us alive?" "Maybe they'd keep you alive. I work better solo anyway." The temperature in the briefing chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Veltar's combat instincts, honed through decades of warfare, were suddenly screaming at him that something very dangerous had just shifted in the room's dynamics. "Chen, you cannot seriously be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm volunteering." Alex checked her wrist chronometer with casual indifference. How long until we reach the drop zone? 47 minutes, but great. That gives me time to gear up and maybe grab a nap. She headed toward the equipment bay, then paused at the hatchway. Oh, and Commander, when you're filing your after-action report, make sure you spell my name right. It's Alex, not whatever linguistic pretzel your computer spat out. She disappeared through the hatch, leaving behind a silence so complete that Veltar could hear the transport's life support systems cycling. Dexan was the first to speak. Sir, she can't be serious. No one infiltrates the Crimson Nexus alone. It's impossible. Impossible for us, Veltar corrected quietly. But humans don't seem to recognize that word the same way we do. 20 minutes later, Veltar found Alex in the equipment bay, methodically checking over gear that looked deceptively simple compared to the Kalari's advanced tactical systems. Basic weapons, minimal armor, and what appeared to be a collection of small devices that his scanner couldn't identify. Chen, I have to ask, do you have a plan? Alex looked up from field stripping a projectile weapon that seemed almost primitive by galactic standards. Sure. Go in, find the target, complete the mission. Pretty standard stuff. That's not a plan, that's a general objective. Plans are what you make when you're trying to control variables. I prefer to eliminate variables instead. She reassembled the weapon with fluid precision, each movement economical and practiced. Besides, your fancy tactical analysis assumed the fortress was designed to repel civilized attackers, right? Yes, but... So the real question is, what happens when someone uncivilized shows up? Before Veltar could respond, the transport's proximity alarms began chiming. They'd reached the shattered belt, and the Crimson Nexus was now visible through the forward viewport, a massive, menacing structure that had broken the will of countless military strategists. Alex stood up, shouldering her gear pack with casual efficiency. This is my stop. The drop zone is still 20 minutes out. Nah, this works better. She headed toward the emergency airlock, leaving Veltar scrambling to follow. Chen, you can't just... The approach vector isn't... Alex paused at the airlock controls and turned back to face the entire strike team, who had gathered to watch what they assumed would be her final moments. Here's the thing about Deathworlders, Commander. We didn't evolve to follow tactical doctrine. We evolved to survive when everything else failed. She hit the airlock release. Try not to start the funeral until you're sure there's a body. The inner door sealed shut, and through the viewport, they watched Alex Chen eject herself into the void of space, heading toward the most impregnable fortress in galactic history, with nothing but basic gear and whatever plan was forming in that terrifyingly unpredictable human mind. Dexan started a betting pool on her survival time. The longest estimate was 4 minutes. They were all wrong. 23 minutes had passed since Alex disappeared into the asteroid field, and Commander Veltar was starting to compose his report to Earth Command. The standard template for regrettable casualty during joint operations was depressingly familiar, though he'd never had to fill one out for someone who'd volunteered to become space debris. Dexan monitored the long-range sensors, occasionally muttering curses in 3 different languages. Still no contact, sir. Her personal beacon went dark 17 minutes ago. Expected, Veltar replied, though his mandibles clicked with nervous tension. The Nexus communication scramblers would interfere with... Every alarm on the transport bridge suddenly screamed to life. The sensor array lit up like a festival display, proximity warnings cascading across multiple screens as something massive powered down in the distance. Through the main viewport, they watched in stunned silence as the Crimson Nexus, that unconquerable fortress, went dark. Not the dramatic darkness of destruction, but the systematic shutdown of a facility whose power grid had just been surgically severed. That's impossible, whispered Korthak, the team's demolitions expert. The Nexus runs on 6 independent fusion cores. You'd need to access the central control matrix to coordinate a shutdown like that, which is located in the highest security section of the station, Dexan added, behind 17 layers of defensive screening. Veltar stared at the darkened fortress, watching as emergency lighting began flickering on in scattered sections. How long since we lost her beacon? 17 minutes, sir. And the power grid failed exactly when? Dexan checked his readings twice before answering. 17 minutes ago, sir. The transport's communication array crackled to life, intercepting Nexus security frequencies. What they heard made every member of the strike team freeze. Breach in Sector 7. Repeat, we have an unauthorized breach. Outer perimeter compromised. How is that even? Something's in the maintenance ducts, tracking multiple. She's where? How did she get past the transmissions cut off abruptly, replaced by the electronic whine of communications jamming. Shh, Velt repeated quietly. They said she. More alarms began sounding from the Nexus, different tones this time. The kind that meant internal security protocols were escalating beyond normal parameters. Through their telescopic viewers, they could see areas of the station lighting up and going dark in seemingly random patterns. Sir, Korthak's voice carried an edge of professional respect mixed with terror. Whatever she's doing in there, it's working. Internal security broadcasts began leaking through the jamming, fragmentary reports that painted an increasingly chaotic picture. Guard Station Delta not responding. Blast doors sealed, she's trapped herself in. Wait, how did she? Medical emergency, Section Chief Vexter is down. Containment breach in holding Block 9. Whoever this is, she's not following standard infiltration doctrine. Veltar found himself leaning forward, straining to catch every transmission. Standard doctrine assumed infiltrators would try to remain undetected, move carefully, avoid confrontation until absolutely necessary. The human, apparently, had other ideas. Request immediate reinforcement to level 47. She's doing what to the gravity generators? I don't care if it's impossible. She's in 3 locations simultaneously. Another wave of darkness swept across sections of the Nexus as critical systems failed in sequence. But these weren't random failures. They followed a pattern that spoke of someone who understood the station's infrastructure better than its own engineers. How? Dexton asked the question they were all thinking. How does she know which systems to target? Humans are good at pattern recognition, Veltar said slowly, but this is beyond pattern recognition. This is like... She studied the station's blueprints for months. Sir, her briefing packet was the same as ours. Basic layout, known defenses, estimated guard rotations. Nothing detailed enough to... Unless she didn't need detailed information, Veltar was beginning to understand something that made his scales crawl. What if she's not following the blueprints at all? The security transmissions were becoming increasingly frantic. Evil 12 is completely dark. She's bypassed 17 checkpoints. Warden Kesvar to all units, initiate lockdown Protocol 7. Protocol 7 is not responding because someone cut the central command relays. How did she even find the central command relays? Korthak was studying the sensor readings with growing amazement. Sir, she's not just disabling systems randomly. Look at this pattern. She's creating a pathway. He overlaid the power failures and security breaches on a schematic of the Nexus. The seemingly chaotic damage formed a clear route from the outer hull straight to the fortress's most secure section. She's carving herself a road, Veltar breathed, right through the heart of their defenses. This is Warden Kesvar to Galactic Command, requesting immediate military support. Nature of threat? Single infiltrator, species unknown, but she's... The transmission dissolved into static, then silence. The Nexus hung in space like a wounded beast, whole sections dark, while others flickered with emergency lighting. No more security broadcasts leaked through the jamming, no more alarms. Just the kind of silence that comes after something unstoppable has finished moving through an obstacle. Sir, Dexon's voice was barely above a whisper, should we prepare for extraction? Veltar stared at the darkened fortress, thinking about the human who'd walked into an airlock with casual confidence and somehow turned the galaxy's most secure prison into her personal playground. "I think," he said carefully, "we should prepare for whatever comes next." Because if there was one thing he'd learned about humans, it was that they rarely did anything the easy way. The silence from the Crimson Nexus stretched into its third hour when something changed. Not alarms this time, not security chatter, something far more unsettling. Laughter. It came through the communication array as a faint echo, barely audible over the static, but unmistakably human, the kind of laughter that suggested someone had just figured out the punchline to a joke that everyone else was still trying to understand. "Sir," Texan's voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "I'm picking up movement inside the station, multiple heat signatures converging on the central detention block. Guards responding to a threat?" "No, sir. The guards are the ones moving towards something. All of them. Every single security officer still active in the facility is heading to the same location." Veltar studied the tactical display, watching as dozens of heat signatures flowed through the station's corridors like water finding its level. It wasn't the chaotic scramble of emergency response. It was purposeful, organized, almost ritualistic. "What's at that location?" "According to the schematics, Warlord Krax's private detention cell." The communication array crackled to life again, but this time it wasn't intercepted security transmissions. It was a clear, direct broadcast on a frequency that cut through every jamming protocol the Nexus possessed. A human voice, calm and conversational. "You know what's funny about impregnable fortresses? They're usually designed to keep things out, not in. Makes you wonder what happens when someone shows up who doesn't particularly care about walls." "That's her," Korthak breathed. "She's broadcasting from inside the detention block." "The question is," Alex's voice continued through the speakers, "what do you do when the thing you've been guarding turns out to be guarding you instead?" Background noise filtered through the transmission. Footsteps, whispered conversations, what sounded like metal being systematically disassembled. Then Alex's voice again, closer to the microphone. "Commander Veltar, I'm betting you can hear this. Your intelligence briefing was missing some pretty important details about our friend Krax. Details that explain why this station was built in the middle of nowhere, why it's staffed by people who've been isolated from their families for years, and why absolutely nobody talks about what actually happens here." Something crashed in the background, followed by a sound that Veltar's translator couldn't identify. Organic, but wrong somehow, like hearing a scream played backward. "See, here's the thing about humans that your tactical assessments always miss. We don't just solve problems, we ask why the problems exist in the first place. And when we start asking those questions, we tend to find answers that nobody wanted us to find." The transmission quality improved suddenly, as if Alex had moved to better equipment. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that made every member of the strike team instinctively check their weapons. "Warlord Krax isn't just a prisoner, Commander. He's a symptom. The Galactic Council didn't build this place to contain one dangerous criminal. They built it to contain what happens when someone figures out how the Council really maintains power across 300 systems." More sounds in the background. Machinery powering up, voices speaking in languages the translator couldn't pass, or wouldn't pass, as if the words themselves were classified beyond its clearance level. "The neat thing about being human is that we're really, really good at breaking things that aren't supposed to be broken. It's like a species-wide compulsion. Show us something that's been working the same way for 3,000 years, and we'll find 17 different ways to make it stop working entirely." A new voice joined the transmission, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. "This one, she's not like the others who've tried. The others came seeking to conquer. This one came seeking to understand." "That's Krax," Veltar realized. "She's actually talking to him." "Understanding is more dangerous than conquest," the warlord continued. "Conquest can be repelled, deterred, negotiated with. Understanding changes everything, makes the impossible seem inevitable." Alex's laughter came through the speakers again, but now it carried something darker. Inevitable. I like that word. You know what's inevitable, Commander? What happens when someone decides that the galaxy's power structure needs some creative renovation? The transmission cut to external sensors, somehow patched through the station's own surveillance network. The strike team found themselves looking at the interior of what should have been the most secure cell in known space. And it was empty. Not just empty of prisoners, empty of everything. Walls, floor, ceiling, all present and accounted for. But the fundamental nature of the space had changed, as if someone had explained to the room that it didn't need to be a prison cell anymore, and it had agreed. Alex stood in the center of the impossible space, no longer wearing the basic gear she'd started with. Instead, she was dressed in what looked like a uniform that belonged to no military or organization that Veltar recognized. Beside her stood a figure that the sensors identified as Warlord Krax, but who looked nothing like the intelligence photos. He looked grateful. The funny thing about the Galactic Council, Alex said, speaking directly to the camera as if she knew they were watching, is that they've built their entire civilization on the assumption that certain things will never change, that certain people will stay locked up, that certain questions will never be asked. She gestured to the empty space around her, where impossibility had become mundane. Humans have this saying, the only constant is change. The Council forgot that. They got comfortable, started thinking their way of doing things was the only way, started believing their own propaganda about natural order and necessary hierarchies. Krax stepped forward, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who'd been waiting centuries to say them. Show them what you showed me, Deathworlder. Show them what their natural order really costs. Alex smiled, and it was the kind of smile that preceded the end of things that had lasted too long. Commander, you might want to buckle up. What comes next isn't going to fit in any after-action report. The transmission feed began showing impossible things. The first sign that everything had changed was the silence, ending with a sound that made Veltar's combat instincts scream. Footsteps, measured, unhurried footsteps echoing through the transport's hull, as if someone was walking across the outer armor plating, which should have been impossible since they were still 40,000 kilometers from the Nexus in hard vacuum. Sir, Dextran's voice barely registered above a whisper. Something just docked with us. That's impossible. Our sensors show nothing within. The airlock cycled. Not the emergency airlock Alex had used to eject herself into space hours ago. The primary docking port, which was designed for controlled, pressurized connections to space stations and other vessels. It cycled with the smooth precision of a routine cargo transfer. Alex walked through the inner door, carrying something that made every member of the strike team take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't Warlord Krax's head, but it was his crown. Not a piece of ceremonial jewelry or symbol of rank, an actual crown, made of crystallized energy that pulsed with its own inner light, the kind of artifact that existed only in theoretical physics papers and the fever dreams of xenoarchaeologists. Mission complete, Alex announced, setting the crown down on the briefing table with casual indifference, although I should probably mention that the mission parameters were completely wrong. She looked exactly the same as when she'd left. Same clothes, same gear, same expression of mild boredom. Except for her eyes. Her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen through the fundamental structures of reality and found them wanting. Krax wasn't a warlord, she continued, helping herself to a nutrition pack from the emergency supplies. He was a librarian. A what? Veltar managed. Librarian. You know, the people who organize information and help others find what they're looking for. Turns out the Galactic Council has been very interested in making sure certain information stays lost. Alex tore open the nutrition pack and made a face. This tastes like compressed regret. Anyway, the Crimson Nexus wasn't a prison, it was a library. The most comprehensive collection of suppressed knowledge in the galaxy. She gestured toward the crown, which continued pulsing with hypnotic rhythm. That's not a weapon or a symbol of conquest. It's a data storage device. Contains about 3 million years' worth of scientific discoveries, philosophical insights, and technological innovations that the Council decided were too dangerous for general distribution. Dexion found his voice first. Too dangerous? How? They make people ask uncomfortable questions. Like why entire species need to depend on Council-controlled resources to survive. Or how terraforming technology that should make worlds self-sufficient somehow creates permanent dependencies instead. Alex sat down at the briefing table, apparently unbothered by the fact that she'd just casually demolished everything they thought they knew about galactic politics. Here's the thing about humans that your intelligence assessments keep missing. We don't just follow orders or complete missions. We investigate, and when we investigate, we tend to find out things that powerful people would prefer stayed hidden. What did you find? Veltar asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know. I found out why the Council really wanted Krax eliminated. Not because he was planning something that could destabilize the sector, because he was planning something that could stabilize it. Permanently. Alex pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a communicator and a sculpture. This is a translation matrix, not for languages, for concepts. It lets different species share ideas that normally wouldn't translate across biological and cultural barriers. She activated the device, and suddenly the air in the briefing chamber filled with something that felt like understanding. Not words or images, but pure comprehension, flowing directly into their minds. The Council maintained power by ensuring that species couldn't truly communicate with each other. Every translation protocol, every diplomatic interface, every cultural exchange program was designed to maintain essential misunderstandings. Isolated species were dependent species. Dependent species were controllable species. The Nexus wasn't just storing suppressed knowledge, Alex continued as the implications settled into their minds like weights. It was developing ways to share that knowledge safely. Krax and his team had figured out how to create genuine cooperation between species that had been kept artificially isolated for millennia. Korthak stared at the crown with something approaching reverence. That's why they couldn't just execute him. They needed to understand what he'd learned, so they could prevent others from learning it too. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Alex's smile returned, and this time it carried the promise of consequences. Humans have this annoying habit of not staying within mission parameters. You sent me to eliminate a threat to galactic stability. So I did. The threat wasn't Krax, Veltar realized. The threat was ignorance. Enforced, systematic ignorance that keeps billions of beings from reaching their potential because it's more profitable to keep them dependent. Alex stood up and walked to the transport's main display, which suddenly showed something impossible. The Crimson Nexus was gone. Not destroyed, transformed. In its place hung a structure that belonged in no engineering manual, a space station that seemed to exist in more dimensions than physics typically allowed. I eliminated the threat by eliminating the system that created it. The knowledge stored in the Nexus is now freely available to anyone with the curiosity to seek it out. The translation matrices are being distributed through channels that the Council can't control or stop. The display shifted, showing star charts with new connection routes appearing between systems. Not hyperspace lanes or wormhole networks. Something entirely different. Communication pathways that bypassed every control mechanism the Council had established. What you're seeing is the beginning of actual galactic civilization, not the managed dependency network the Council calls civilization, but genuine cooperation between genuinely equal partners. They'll never allow it, Dexter said. The Council will send everything they have to stop this. Let them. Alex's voice carried absolute confidence. Because here's the final thing your intelligence reports got wrong about humans. We don't just break things that need breaking, and we don't just build things that need building. We also teach other people how to break and build things for themselves. She gestured to the crown, which had begun resonating with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in frequencies beyond normal hearing. Every species that accesses this knowledge will learn how to create their own translation matrices, how to establish direct communication with other species, how to share resources without creating dependencies, how to solve problems cooperatively instead of competitively. The transport's communication array suddenly came alive with transmissions from across the sector. Not distress calls or military communications, but something unprecedented in galactic history. Species talking directly to each other, sharing discoveries, offering assistance, without expectation of control or payment. The revolution isn't happening on battlefields or in council chambers, Alex said, watching the cascade of communication with satisfaction. It's happening in minds that are finally free to understand each other. She picked up the crown and handed it to Veltar, who found himself holding something that felt like crystallized possibility. Your new mission, if you choose to accept it, is to return to Galactic Command and deliver this, along with a very simple message. Which is? Alex headed toward the airlock, pausing only to grab another nutrition pack. The age of artificial scarcity is over. The age of genuine abundance is beginning. And if they want to maintain any relevance in what comes next, they'd better start learning how to serve instead of control. She cycled through the airlock, and moments later they watched through the viewports as a ship that definitely hadn't been there before detached from their hull and disappeared into space that folded around it like welcoming arms. Veltar looked down at the crown in his hands, feeling the weight of transformed galaxies pressing against his consciousness. His after-action report would consist of a single line: human operative has successfully completed the mission by redefining what the mission needed to be. But in the margins he would add a personal note. Recommend immediate revision of all assumptions regarding human capabilities, human intentions, and human definitions of impossible. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when someone decided that limitations were just suggestions that hadn't been properly questioned yet.